Hello everybody, JAZZIZ online editor Matt Micucci here, welcoming you to a new episode of JAZZIZ Travel. This is a podcast series that explores jazz and creative music in all four corners of the globe, touching on cross-cultural projects, different music traditions, and more through conversations with or about groundbreaking, innovative, and visionary artists. 2022 marks the year of the 60th anniversary of the release of Jazz Samba, the landmark 1962 album by Charlie Byrd and Stan Getz that launched bossa nova to international stardom. And the internationally acclaimed guitarist Nate Najar pays homage to the spirit and iconic repertoire of Jazz Samba with his very own Jazz Samba Pra Sempre, a loving reimagining of this seminal album, navigating the tracklist with equal parts reverence and invention. And here to talk with us about this new project, the legacy of the original record and the influence of bossa nova at large is Nate Najar himself. So without further ado, fire up on Audio Teeny and listen to the audio waves as they fly through the air. Here is our conversation with Nate Najar. Hello, Nate. Welcome to JAZZIZ Travel.
Hi, Matt. Good to be here with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here on our little podcast series. And, well, first of all, what part of the world are you speaking to us from right now?
I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida right now. I'm in downtown St. Petersburg, Florida, looking over the buildings in downtown. It's really kind of beautiful. It's not quite as good as Rio, but only just.
Well, Rio, there's not many places that are as beautiful as Rio. I actually have never been to Rio, but Brazil tops the list of countries that I would love to visit. And that could be any part of Brazil, as a matter of fact. And a large part of that is because of the amazing music that, of course, is part of the Brazilian canon, let's say. And so it's really great to get to talk with you, Nate, today, because we will be talking about an amazing new project that you will have coming out in the next few weeks from the time of recording this podcast, of course. We'll be talking about Jazz Samba Pra Sempre, your upcoming album, a celebration of the iconic 1962 album Jazz Samba by Charlie Byrd and Stan Getz. Nate, for anyone unfamiliar with this record, why would you say that this is such an important album?
Well, the bossa nova, this sound of Brazil, this sort of modified samba sound that became a popular music form, this bossa nova really got such a worldwide attention in the 60s, and it stayed for a very long time, and it's kind of just part of the canon of music, this sound. And it got its diaspora from this Jazz Samba record. It was it's really just such an important work in the story of the spread of this repertoire and this sound. And the most fascinating part is that it's a jazz record that got the start. It wasn't a singer's record. It wasn't although in a way it was a singer's record, because the João Gilberto's record Chega de Saudade in 1959, it was really the artistic impetus for Charlie Byrd to make Jazz Samba. But Jazz Samba 1962, Desafinado, Stan Getz was the right partner to be on it, and it won a Grammy. It got a lot of attention. There was this is sort of a like a folk story, but I heard it from a drummer, but I don't recall where he attributed it. And I think it was Charlie who told him. And I think it came from Creed Taylor, the producer. But somebody in the industry had suggested that the presence of the cowbell made Desafinado so popular, because it cut through on the jukeboxes. You could really hear it, and so it always cut through, and you always heard it, and that rhythm was sort of incessant and insidious, which I get a kick out of. When we're mixing music these days, and you've got little percussion elements like cowbells or go-gos or shakers and things, because we listen on phones so much, you have to make sure you don't make them too loud, because on a phone it's going to speak so much louder there's no bottom, there's nothing below about 500 hertz on a phone. So it comes out so much louder on the phone. And every time I'm doing something with the percussion and I worry, oh, the shaker's too loud, or the cowbell's too loud, or the tamborino, the pandeiro, or something that's supposed to be like a rhythmic element that you feel. I always go back to jazz samba and I think about, yeah, but the cowbell's the reason it was a hit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's kind of a cute. So, but anyway, it's an important record because it really brought attention to this music, and as a result, the music spread around the world. Lots of people picked it up and said, "Let me do something with that rhythm. Let me do something with that repertoire." And Getz went on to make a number of more iconic bossa nova records. Thanks to the association, João Gilberto, Antônio Carlos Jobim, Astrud Gilberto, they all managed to have a real presence on the world's stage. Astrud is a really interesting story because she did not enjoy much success in Brazil at the time, and yet she was a massive worldwide star everywhere else. These days, obviously I wasn't around back then. These days, the Brazilian community seems to be pretty exalting of Brazilians who are doing the Brazilian thing outside of Brazil, because there's a lot of pride in the culture, and I think that's a wonderful thing. But it all started with jazz samba, so lucky us.
And from a guitarist standpoint, what are some of the groundbreaking characteristic traits that bossa nova introduced or helped introduce?
It's brilliant because, me as a guy who likes to play a nylon string guitar, a guitar with you play it with your fingers, sort of, along the lines of the classical thing. The music is just so suited. It's because it's the instrument that they play. In North America, we play steel string guitars and we strum an open C chord. And, it's similar in other parts of the sort of English diaspora. But, the guitars they use in Brazil are the same guitars that I like to play, these Spanish guitars and old world guitars, I'll call them. But it's interesting because, samba was around for a number of years. I'll tell you, samba has a lot in common with New Orleans jazz. That sounds kind of funny at first, but the way the samba schools came up, and in Carnival, they would have the parades, and the samba school, it's like a social organization. It's probably the best way to describe it. And, they work all year on the presentation, on the float and the parade and the show and it's so similar. It's almost the same thing as like what happens in Mardi Gras. Mm. And so the samba schools, everyone would have a new song for Carnival every year. And so samba is a rhythmic thing, and it's a cultural phenomenon. It's a way of life, and what's really hip about it is that João Gilberto wasn't the first to do it, but he was the first to really kind of perfect it. And what he did is he took the sound of samba, which is a number of different percussion instruments. And these are, the samba schools to this day, they don't go out and buy their instruments. If you think about it, if you've ever seen a video of Carnival in Brazil, if you ever seen, the girls with the feathers and the floats and all the dancing and there's, 400 or 500 drummers in each samba school. These are people from the favelas. These are low income, extremely low income people. They make their own drums. This isn't like you're going to the music. You're not going to Guitar Center or something and buying 500 hepinkis. They make them out of oil cans. They make them out of whatever they can make them. And we've seen places where they make them. It's really hip how they do it. So the samba schools, they make their own drums. But there's a tamborin, there's the cuica. The cuica goes ooh, 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 ooh,
right,
ooh. Yeah. There's agogo bells. There's all these different. And what happens is the instruments all play a different part, and you end up with this kind of potpourri of rhythm. It's indescribable. We've been to a samba school rehearsal, and just the sheer majesty the 500 drummers. I'll send you a little video of a samba school rehearsal. It is maybe you can post it too. Even it's so just the majesty of the drums, the visceral effect of how it all comes together. It's like you're on a magic carpet.
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe it. So going back to the guitar, which was your original question, João Gilberto managed to take all of this from samba and distill it, all these different parts, the sorduch, all these different sounds, and put it into the guitar and do it in a very delicate and thoughtful way.
Yeah.
And so, what you hear on the street, etc., turns into something like. And there it is, and
Right.
all of a sudden, this just new language just completely opened up. So this is rhythmically, right? And then harmonically, this is the first half of the 20th century. So this is kind of before pop music becomes a commercialized pop music thing. And so people write songs in the old songwriting traditions. And so harmonically, there's a lot of European language. Bach, basically the songwriting tradition harmonically and melodically is not very different from our songwriting tradition. Our Cole Porters, our Gershwins, our Ari Barroso wrote the famous tune Brazil, da 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 da. He's one of Brazil's greatest composers. That songwriting tradition is not much different from like an Irving Berlin in terms of the harmony and the melody. But then you marry it to these African rhythms, and you have a recipe for magic.
Yeah, yeah. It's an incredible coming together of cultures.
Yeah, it's the perfect coming together of cultures, because the other thing about it that I see is that nothing tries to dominate anything else. There's no intention of making anything other than what it is. The whole point of it is to exalt what it is and just combine all these things that we love into one perfect thing. So it's really hip.
What's your first memory, or do you have a first memory of encountering this particular album? Do you even remember where you were when you first heard it and all of those little details?
I was a big fan of Charlie Byrd when I had started playing the guitar. I discovered Charlie, and so I went out and I picked up everything of his I could possibly get a hold of. To me, it was unique because he was a guy who played. I was interested in jazz, and he played jazz, but he played on a classical guitar with a very warm sound, and it sounded like a whole orchestra. He'd play a tune, and I didn't miss anybody. And it wasn't like a piano doing what a piano does. It was the guitar is such a poetic instrument. So I was just crazy about Charlie. And I got everything, I was probably 18 when I heard Jazz Samba for the first time. And I had a couple of Charlie records. What's interesting is I had a Brazilian record that he had made after Jazz Samba came out. And it's called Bossa Nova pelos Pásaros, which is Bossa Nova by the birds. It's a play on words. It's really cute. And it's all little vignettes. They're all short tunes. There's not much jazz improvisation. It's mostly arrangements. And it's Charlie's trio plus other, there's some woodwinds and some brass and vibraphone and stuff and extra percussion playing a lot of this repertoire.
Right.
That was the first Charlie Byrd Brazilian record I had heard. And then the next one I got was Jazz Samba. And the first thing I remember about Jazz Samba was, you turn it on and those first notes are keyed or best playing. Doom, doop, da, boom, bum, ba, dum, bum. There's a. And all of a sudden, from the very first note, a world has opened up to you. There's this aesthetic world. That record, good, bad, or indifferent, inhabits its own space. And that's one of the things that really turned me on about records in the first place when I discovered that. And I think all the greatest, I mean, you think about, jazz fans and all the great Rudy Van Gelder records, they have a sound. This isn't a Van Gelder record. A guy named Ed Green, who ended up to work in TV much later, he recorded Jazz Samba in Pierce Hall at the All Souls Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C. And, it was a 3-hour session. They set up, Charlie had the arrangements, they worked it out. The guy set up the microphones, they played, they listened to the playback. They said, okay, great. See you at the gig. And that was the end of that. And it became, a worldwide sensation. But the first thing is just this aesthetic, this world view that happened. And then the other thing, which I find so fascinating, and it's something that I've really sort of paid attention to in my career, in my music making, is that the entire record simmers. Even when it gets hot in a very, I'm not using the right language for it. It gets hot in a very cool way. It's just the whole thing. It's like if it were a funk record, it'd be the funkiest thing you ever heard, because it's even and it goes, and it's once again, it's like a magic carpet, because it's got this, it's not flat, it doesn't sit still, but at the same time, it never beats you over the head. It doesn't assault you. It's not aggressive. All it does is invite you and draw you in and say, I'm warm and I'm full of love and everything that's great in the world, and I want you to be a part of it. And I just think that's so hip that the entire record does that. And it reminds me of Prince. Prince used to talk all the time about, come on, nobody was funkier than Prince. And he would always say, if you want it to be funky, if he's talking about playing like a part, like you got a Telecaster or something, something like that or whatever. Prince would always say, if you want it to be funky, don't mess with the part. Let it go, play it, and leave it the same. Don't change it. Because it's this sort of, the fact that it's not moving, you're just constantly building up tension with no release. And it's just so funky because you're waiting for that thing to happen that's not going to happen. And, that's maturity and control. There's a lot of great, like R&B type records that have, that understand and utilize that aesthetic concept. But Jazz Samba has it, and it's, so you put it on and you just go, here we go. So when I made our Jazz Samba, I wanted to keep the aesthetic. It's like an ephemeral bubble, the record inhabits its own world and it invites you in to be a part of it. I wanted to keep that aspect, and I wanted to keep the things about Jazz Samba that, for instance, we played Desperado and it starts off, doom, doop, doo, doop, 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 doop. It's like, here we go. We're ready for this. We know what's going to happen. So I put enough familiarity in there while at the same time, really making the record about how I relate to these songs and how I relate to the repertoire.
Right. Well, then let's talk about the group that you assembled for this project. I know Chuck Red is one of the musicians on this record, and he was once a part of the Charlie Byrd Trio.
It's the great thing about Chuck. Chuck's been putting up with me for nearly 20 years. I'm gonna see him next week. Actually, we're playing at the West Texas Jazz Party. I'm gonna see him next week. I haven't seen him in a few months. It'd be really nice to get on stage with him again. He's been putting up with me for nearly 20 years. And the really funny part is, I was a kid. He's a little more than 20 years older than I am. And so I was a kid and I had these Charlie Byrd records. And, there's a 21-year-old drummer on the Charlie Byrd records. And to me, Chuck Red was always the kid who played with Charlie Byrd. Yeah. So, I finagled my way into a gig at Blues Alley, which is an iconic jazz club in Washington, D.C., in Georgetown. Charlie Byrd played there forever. Everyone and their brother has played there. It's an iconic major jazz venue. And about 2004 or so, somehow I conned my way into a gig. And the best thing I did is, I called Chuck Red and I basically said, I'm a kid. I work, I try to be like Charlie Byrd. This is what I like to do. Would you play drums with me? I got a gig at Blues Alley. And of course he's thinking, oh, Blues Alley hired him. Sure, I'll play with you. He can't be that bad if he's working at Blues Alley. And so he played the gig with me, and I haven't stopped calling him since. So we've become good friends. We've been all over together. We've had a real ball doing lots of things. And so of course, and Chuck's played on a lot of records with me. We did. I did a couple records for Candid. I did a couple of records for Woodward Avenue and Chuck's on many of them. But he's the natural choice on a record like this. Obviously, he was the drummer in the Charlie Byrd trio. There was never a question of anyone else to include. It was just simply, hey, Chuck, we're making Jazz Samba next year. When are you available so I can make it happen?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and then Herman Burney's the bass player, and I love Herman because he's just a force of nature. Herman plays joyfully. Herman is connected to the source. He's connected to the universe, and he plays with joy and with love and with intention. And he's got a great beat and a great sound, and he's playing Keter's bass. So that bass, when you put on my Jazz Samba record and you're doop 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 doop, those notes are on the same bass that Keter played on the original Jazz Samba.
Yeah, I'd read about that, and I was particularly intrigued about this fact because that's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty hip. And Herman, I've known Herman a little over a decade. There's a number of gigs that we've been on together, and so he was a very, very natural. I was talking to him about doing this record for a few years. Hey, Herman, we're going to make Jazz Samba. You in? Yeah, of course. Okay, great. So when we finally got to doing it, it was really special. But so Patrick Bettison plays Fender Rhodes on the record, and Patrick he lives here in town. He's English. He's from Yorkshire, actually. I like Yorkshiremen. I've got a Yorkshire drummer who lives in London who's made a few records with me, and we've traveled around the world a lot. And I like Yorkshiremen. But so Patrick is he's a multi-instrumentalist, and it's really funny. Back in the 90s, he played bass in Acoustic Alchemy, and the really funny part about that is I dep in Acoustic Alchemy for the last couple of years. I've got a tour with them this summer. I fill in for Greg Carmichael. So we've got that connection, which is interesting. But Patrick's like he lives in town here, and he plays in our band. He tours with me and my wife Daniela, and so we include him everywhere. And I thought it was a nice touch to put the Rhodes on Jazz Samba because it's the original record. Charlie's brother Joe plays guitar. There's two guitars on the original Jazz Samba. And actually on a couple of spots there's two basses because Joe is also a great bass player, and so he plays arco on some spots where Keter's playing pizzicato, for arrangements. And so I thought rather than adding in, I almost put another guitar. I talked to Daniela. Maybe Daniela would play guitar on, and I thought maybe having Phil Fest, my good friend Phil Fest, play guitar, the son of the great Brazilian piano player Manfredo Fest. And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to put the Rhodes on it. I like the sound. I like the blend. Let's do that. So I asked Patrick to participate. And then having the electric piano gives it more of a relatable sound to a contemporary audience. And it gave the record a kind of really neat aesthetic. And then the pièce de résistance of the whole thing was the inclusion of Daniela on two songs, because the original Jazz Samba has no vocals. And I'm just, I love her. I'm enamored with her. I think she's the greatest thing since Wonder Bread. I think, frankly, she's much better than Wonder Bread because Wonder Bread has no nutrition. But
I don't even know what it is.
They say the best thing since sliced bread. I just, she's. I think Danielle is just a remarkable talent. And the aesthetic and the thing that it's unique and it's special and it's delicious and it's all the things that we love about music. So I tried to craft a little world for her on her tunes. I tried to craft an ephemeral bubble, so to speak. So, Matt, I got to tell you, this particular record is. I don't usually get excited about things I do. You make it and then you go, I did the best I could. I hope it came off the way it was supposed to. And this record, we finished it, and I said, "Wow, I can't. That is so. It's just so much more than the sum of its parts. It really was a labor of love, and I'm astonished at how cool it turned out.
Right.
After everybody came together and contributed, I'm astonished at how cool it turned out, and I'm over the moon. If I died tomorrow, and nobody heard the record, I'll have died knowing I did what I was supposed to do. You know what I
mean? That's not going to happen because at least one person right here heard it. So,
well, thank you for that.
One person heard it. It's not out yet, so there you go. But so I take it, using a term that you used earlier, you feel like your record, your personal version of Jazz Samba, simmers.
I do feel like it simmers, and that was an intention, and I hope it comes across that way.
Absolutely, Nate. It certainly does. Nate, it was such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you very much for joining us and talking with us on JAZZIZ Travel.
Matt, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm grateful for the invitation.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Nate Najar. His new album, Jazz Samba Pra Sempre, will be released on the 17th of June. And I also hope you will join me again next week for more globetrotting conversations on a new episode of JAZZIZ Travel. And in the meantime, why not check out more of our content on jazziz.com and get even more exclusive content when you subscribe. Till the next time, this is Matt Micucci signing off. See you soon.